who was leading it. I've completely forgotten. I'll pass over to both of you and I'll pass over to Charlotte. I will stop sharing and I hope you enjoy.
Thank you very much, Amelia. So hi everyone, hope you're all doing all right and not too jaded and fatigued from the whiz bang of all the talks we've had, but hopefully this will be quiet, laid back and easygoing and informative for you. So welcome to the athlete discussion, as Amelia has already said. What we're going to be doing in this session is we're going to be having a chat with to the high performance athlete about motivation, performance and well-being. So three of the key themes that have sort of been running throughout the conference today. The high performance athlete we have here is Charlotte Bardsley. I was going to say Beardsley for a second then, I corrected myself right at the last second. Charlotte Bardsley, who is a current England international tennis table player and also a current under-21s national champion as well, if I'm correct. So welcome, Charlotte. Are you okay there? Can you hear us okay?
Yeah, I'm good.
Fantastic. We've also got myself here doing part of the as forming a part of the discussion. My name's Max. I'm an applied sports psychology researcher here at Newcastle, and we've also got Adam. I'll let Adam introduce himself.
Hi there. Hi, Charlotte. So I'm a lecturer in sport and exercise psychology and been lecturing at Newcastle for 5 years. And really interested to get your take as well on some of these questions that we've got lined up around sports psychology today.
So just before we get into the meat of it, a little bit of housekeeping. So we've got a 35-minute chat here with 10 minutes of questions. Please ensure that you're muted throughout the discussion, which I can see everybody is. And if you do have any questions, just stick them in the chat or just wait to the end and you can pop your hand up and we'll make sure they all get addressed. So without further ado, I suppose we can kind of get into the meat of it. We'll start with maybe a broad question, Charlotte. Could you maybe give us a sort of timeline as up to now, a brief timeline, because I appreciate maybe an extensive one might be a bit of a stretch, but a brief timeline up to now is sort of your achievements, accomplishments, why you got into table tennis and those sorts of things.
Yeah, so I was a professional table tennis player in Germany for 2 years, playing in the Bundesliga. And then last year I competed in the Commonwealth Games for England. I started playing when I was 11. I picked it up at school and then I quickly joined a club and then got better, went to regional training, and then I made it into the national team and I represented England at all ages, so from cadet, junior and senior in major competitions like European Championships, and then as well domestically I've won several national titles. So that's basically my career.
A blitzkrieg start to things. And has there been any sort of accomplishment or achievement or tournament that's been particularly a standout for you?
Probably the Commonwealth Games. That was like my biggest thing that I achieved.
Which one was that? Which Commonwealth Games was it you went to?
Last year in Birmingham.
Birmingham, okay, yeah. And so you missed out on the one over in Australia?
Yeah, I was only 16 at the time, so I wasn't very old.
Well, that kind of makes sense then, I suppose, doesn't it? Okay, so what was the Commonwealths like being there for the first time?
It was amazing. It was probably the best thing I've ever played in, partly because I'm from Birmingham, so to play sort of like in my home city. And yeah, I'd put a lot of work in to qualify for that competition. We had like a qualification tournament, so it was like a lot of stress and pressure to qualify, and then I'm just really happy that I performed well at the competition as well.
Excellent. And do you play mostly singles or is it doubles?
Yeah, we play singles. We also play a team event, but that's like comprised of singles matches, and there's also doubles and mixed doubles. So I was playing in all of those events.
Excellent. And then I got one more question just to set the scene, then I'll pass over to you, Adam. You see you're getting twitchy over there and you want to get your question in. What's next for you? You know, you've done Commonwealths now.
Yeah,
what
so
are you looking forward to next?
Now it's quite difficult. I say it's quite difficult, but I'm at sort of a crossroads, I'd say, my career, because I'm now studying an undergraduate degree at the University of Cambridge, which is very difficult to manage both my sports and my education. So that's something that I'm having to navigate currently.
Excellent. Yeah, managing those dual career aspirations is definitely tough.
Excellent. Okay, thanks for that then, Charlotte. So I've just got a couple of questions really initially around kind of motivation. So we know that athletes often have found different reasons as to why they initially engage in their sport. So what is it that's kind of kept you going and has pushed you to kind of get to the level that you've got to, Charlotte?
Well, I think I'll probably say like it's always different for everyone, but for me, the only way I can sort of describe it is some people see the world as like, a glass half full or a glass half empty. But for me, I'm always like, oh, my glass is never full enough. Like there's always more I can achieve. Like I want something. So I think it's like the desire to achieve more, to be successful is what motivates me. So in some ways, it's kind of like strange because you're sort of basing your kind of worth on achievement. So that's kind of a double-edged sword. But because if it doesn't work out for you, then it's hard. But for me, it's always the drive to like be better. But that's one part of it. And I'd say the other part of it is I really love learning. And table tennis is a sport where you're always learning. Like there's so much to learn. It's quite fun. I'm one of those people that I enjoy learning new things, improving. So that's sort of what attracts me to sport and particularly table tennis.
Okay, that sounds really interesting. And this may or may not be a thing for you then, Charlotte, but has there been times where you've found times in the past where it's difficult to get motivated and you wake up on that Monday morning and it's difficult and you just want to kind of stay in bed rather than getting up and training and juggling your studies and your sport as well? How have you managed to keep your motivation kind of throughout any times where you've suffered and had a dip at all in that?
Often I think I would lose motivation if I've put too much pressure on myself or like I feel like I'm overworked. So like it's almost like you put so much expectation and pressure to achieve a goal that in the end you start to not like the sport because it's losing its fun, so to speak, because it's all about the results and you're not getting them. So in those kind of situations, I would often maybe take a session or two off, just to put things into perspective, just to like step away from the table and think, oh, actually, I do like the sport. I'm just panicking or overthinking in the moment. So it's just like taking a step away, maybe like 1 or 2 days, 3 days off, I would do, and then stops you getting like jaded, essentially.
Mm. And what? So Max, I was just going to say, sorry, and you might have been asking the same kind of question, but what role do you think a coach has to play when around motivation, and particularly say you feel jaded and you want to have a session or two off? What role do you think a coach can play to facilitate that, do you think?
I think a good coach would be able to recognize like when a player is like losing concentration. Like they can tell if it's like, oh, if they're losing concentration just because, they've not had a good night's sleep, or is it actually because of something more to do with the sport? Like, so I think it's quite hard, but I think it's probably something that both the player and the coach should discuss, because it's best for like you need to have like an open and honest conversation, rather than, because often I reckon, well, you can often feel guilty if you don't feel motivated because you think, why am I not feeling motivated? So I think it's probably like good if coaches have like a good relationship with the athletes, that they can be open and honest about those sort of conversations and not say punish an athlete for not feeling motivated, but have an awareness that like that can happen, and it doesn't mean that the player is not interested in the sport or wants to stop or anything.
I ask a follow-up to that? Sorry, you pretty much did answer the same question I was going to ask. So how do you approach that yourself personally with your coach? Have you got a really strong relationship there that has made the communication easier, or is it just an expectation?
I guess it's hard because I'm a person that's never not motivated. So like I'm always like, if I want to do something, then I'm going to do 100%. Otherwise, there's no point doing it at all. Like there's no point doing anything half-heartedly. So for me, I was like, if I can't put 100% into the session mentally, then I'm actually making things worse, because I'm going to go into a session where can't really be bothered, and I'm only going to get more annoyed and I'm not going to learn anything. And so I think it's me myself, like I can identify, like I know actually I'm not really focused, so I might make the session different. Like I might do a fitness training, or I might focus on something where it requires less, the thing I don't want to do, or but obviously I wouldn't be doing that all the time, but that kind of thing. So it's like probably having the self-awareness of knowing a bit about yourself, really how you are with things.
Sounds like you have a huge amount of autonomy over your training in there as well. Is that something that you find useful?
Yeah, I mean, we train a lot. So when I was training full-time in Germany, like it was 6 hours every day for the whole week. So it's not like when we say take a session or two off, it's like in the grand scheme of things, it's like quite minimal. So it's like you can see, like, because you're playing so much that you can get like, you can lose your mind quite quickly because you're just doing the same thing over and over again. But I think that's just the nature. Like it's almost like that's just part of the sport. Like to get good, you have to do that. So once you can accept that, then that's just what it is.
I think a lot of coaches have been thinking, I wish I had athletes with your mentality. Just
Yeah.
so like driven and motivated.
Yeah.
But hey, how it is what it is. It's definitely an amazing trait to have there, and long may it continue. So I might ask you some questions about social media now as well. So we know social media is obviously something that a lot of athletes are engaged in, some very actively engaged in it, others a little bit more passively, but either way, we can't really avoid it. I'm just wondering what your experiences are of social media and what impact, if any, that's had on your motivation.
In terms of my motivation, I'm not really sure exactly, but I would say that like social media is quite a hard one because you can't not have it, because you can't, there's no way around not using it. Like I did go through points where I tried to, like, you know, remove myself off social media to try to concentrate, but then I found very quickly very difficult because you just need it to communicate and sort things out. So, but I often found that it was quite a distraction. I often spent a lot of time wasted just on my phone. Like for example, in a session, like I in the breaks between sessions, instead of like actually doing something like sort of not productive, but something which you can sort of take your mind off training or like to relax, I often would just waste time like on my phone, and then this will kind of make me feel worse than like actually going and enjoying myself doing something. So it's like social media is a distraction, but I wouldn't even say it's a very good distraction either. So I for me personally, I would try to minimize like my time on it, but that's really hard, and I don't really see how. I don't see how you can stop it. I think it would be good if you had like outside of your sport something else that you were doing. So when I was playing full time, I wasn't in school, so that meant I would be on social media all the time, and then you'll just sort of waste it. It's not very healthy, like for your own sort of mental well-being. Whereas when I was in school, I was like, I couldn't be on my phone. So I think it's about like finding a good balance so that you're not distracted by your phone and social media, you're distracted by something else more, which would be more helpful.
I think that well-being, sorry Adam, you go. I'm hogging things a bit.
No, go on, Max. Absolutely fine, no problem.
I think that well-being point is quite an interesting one, actually. You know, there's a lot of talk in the media about social media and its impact on well-being. I'm just wondering, what are your reflections and thoughts on that, particularly, you know, when you're involved in your sport? Do you feel it impacts your well-being, or have you seen it impact your peers' as well-being? And if so, how?
I think perhaps probably one of the hardest things is like, because if you're an athlete and all you're doing is training and stuff, and then you're seeing like all of your friends or whatever going out and having like fun doing other things, and it makes you sort of question, oh, should I be doing that? Like, oh, I would really like to do that. So I think, but then you sort of then realize that they're probably not having that good a time, really. Probably doing something much more better, doing my sport or something. But yeah, probably comparisons maybe to like other people, like, oh, they seem to be doing a lot better than me, or when really like it's just acknowledging that social media is basically fake. Like it's not real. So you're kind of looking at things which are like the people's I don't know what the what the word is, like construct sort of thing, and they're constructing something to make it look amazing, but really like it's probably not. So you're better off just focusing on yourself.
Yeah, I agree completely. Is it? I think this. Sorry, Adam, you go.
I was going to say it seems a very, very mature response on that, I would say, actually, Charlotte. Just off the back of that, in terms of coaches, do you think athletes kind of overuse and over-reliance on social media is something that coaches should regulate? Do you think it would be okay for a coach to kind of step in for an athlete if they thought, you know what, you're either wasting your time too much on this, you're not focused, or actually there might be some detriments from being on social media too much? Do you think that's something that a coach should be speaking to the athlete around, or is it just something you would feel that they would be overreaching if they had a word with you about that?
Yeah, I think it really depends on like the extent to which it is like influencing the sport, because it's sort of like how involved is a coach in someone's private life, because if it's your private life, there's nothing. So I guess it really depends on like how much of an impact it's having on your sport, and if like you are posting pictures of yourself going out partying and whatever, and the coach sees that, then they can say, you know, really like is this sort of thing that like a top athlete would be like preparing, how they would be preparing for a competition. So I think it's probably, it sounds straight like I don't know if it's like, is it in the coach's jurisdiction to like monitor behavior? So I don't know. I think it's quite hard because there's not so much. Social media is only a relatively new thing in the grand scheme of things. Like it's only been happening. It's only since I don't know, 2010. So it's only 13 years. So it's not. I feel like there's not enough data or anything to really to show. But I think at the end of the day, like probably the top athletes, the reason why they are the best is because of their ability to focus and to not do those kind of things. So perhaps potentially social media can be sort of a pitfall for athletes who potentially are, I don't know, vulnerable is not the right word, but like vulnerable to or susceptible to going astray and not focusing on like what they need to do.
That's great. Max, you got a question?
Yeah, maybe one more on this. It's similar to the coaches, and glad you segued into that one. If there was going to be any recommendations you were going to give to coaches about social media and athletes using them, or something that coaches could or should be aware of when it comes to social media, is there anything you would say to coaches?
I probably would say the only thing that impacts performances that role social media has on like sleep, like people just will stay up or like really to the early hours of the morning just scrolling for no reason. Like there's, when you think about like what, after I've spent too much time on social media, I think what have I actually learned from doing that? Like nothing. There's nothing I can recall that was of any gain. So I think it's just because it's addictive, like it will get in the way of like preparation. So sleep is like probably, it just gets in the way of your preparation, and you end up time wasting, and then suddenly, you know, what you thought was 10 minutes has now been an hour, and you know all your plans are. So I think it's just being aware that it's addictive, and just like making sure that athletes are aware of that. But there's definitely the sleep thing, like you can just stay up and then suddenly it's like 2 a.m. Not good.
Not good. Doom scrolling, we've all been there, haven't we? Doom scrolling through Instagram, Twitter. Just me.
Charlotte, just in terms of, so you talked about the, you know, student and athlete kind of role, this dual role that you have. So that potentially could be, you know, really demanding of your time, and just, you know, a lot going on at the same time. So how are you able to kind of balance that, do you think? You know, what is it that you do, or are there any things that you kind of put in place to really help kind of protect your time, to make sure that you've got that balance between being a student, being an athlete, but also having a life as well?
I think, okay, like it very much depends on like your sport and what you're studying and things. So like I think, okay, my situation now, it's probably different, but when I was, say, doing my education earlier, and I was also playing a lot. I think the whole like juggling thing is possible because it's only possible when you're like honest with yourself and you accept that it requires sacrifice. So I always said, like, if you want to do something, you'll just find a way to do it. Like, you won't make excuses. So I know, like, to get the best exam results, and also to do my table tennis, it means, you know, I can't go out with my friends every night. That's just it. Like, and you have to accept that. If you're not prepared to do that, then you can't expect to get 3 A stars and be really good at sport. So I think it's just like acknowledging, it's being honest with your time and being like, actually, you know what takes priority. And if it's actually I want to spend time with my friends, then you have to realize that, you know, that might then have a knock-on effect on something else. So you have to decide what you want. Once you know what you want, then you can work out. So for me, like now, or also, but when I was younger, I didn't really, it wasn't a problem because I enjoyed doing the sport and the study. I didn't really care. I didn't really want to go to parties or whatever. I wasn't really interested in that. So I was doing things I was interested in. So when you really enjoy the things you're doing, it doesn't feel like you're juggling or struggling to manage because you're doing something you want to do. If that makes sense.
Yeah, really interesting take on that. Max, I'm just thinking it'd be worth us moving on to kind of the performance aspects of this. So in terms of kind of focusing on, we've touched upon it a little bit, but in terms of the coach-athlete relationship, Charlotte, could you describe a coach-athlete relationship that is worked really well for you? I mean, you don't have to name names, either good or bad or whatever, but, you know, just talk us through from your experiences what a positive coach-athlete relationship looked like to you, and what impact you think that had on you.
I'm sorry, I'm just gonna find my notes. Oh,
that's okay.
I think it really depends on. For me, when I was training, I had like a few different coaches, so I found it was quite useful that they all brought something sort of slightly different. What one of my coaches, a lot of them is experience. So often I think it's quite hard, even if, say, a coach has not necessarily achieved like really successful results or whatever, but I guess it's experience, and they pass that experience on to you, and that's something that I really value, versus, say, a coach who sort of thinks they know everything, versus a coach who never stops sort of learning. Like, they're always open to new ideas, and then they can then offer their advice, but they're not just sort of saying, oh, this is how it is and that's how it will be. That's often, I find, quite hard to work with them because they're not really like sort of understanding of like who you are as a person or what you think. So a coach that's sort of collaborative but can offer their own sort of experience. My other things is being like kind and caring, like, because sport is hard. I think people underestimate that it's very difficult. So having like being sort of supportive and like helping you when you're not feeling great. Also, I would say being a good coach relationship for me is when they're really good at explaining things. So it's so hard to because the game is so complex. Just having a good ability to explain things is, I find that useful. And also another thing is that coaches can be different. So like my dad, like he also coached me, but not on like the technical sort of side of the game. He didn't really understand that. So other coaches can maybe help with that. But like my dad was more like a supportive, like motivational kind of person to like keep me calm under pressure and all of those sort of things. So I think it also really depends on like the sort of like the function of the coach, if that makes sense.
There's something that you kind of expanded upon it here, but one of the first things you said was it's that getting something slightly different from each individual. And I think if you could like expand upon what is it you're looking for, or what is it that you feel you need to get from each individual to make the whole, if that makes sense. Like what would the whole look like, and what does it look like in individual parts, and maybe why that's important to you?
Yeah, so probably like if I'd say like my parents, they're not coaches, but I'd say that they're like supporting staff, and my dad would come with me to competitions and he would sit in the corner and coach me. So like from them was probably more a supporting role, someone who not like a shoulder to cry on, but like someone who could sort of deal with the emotional like aspects of the game, which is quite hard to do with the coach because it's not like a personal relation, whereas like with a parent or family member, it's like they can sort of deal with your emotions a bit more, but they can also be a bit more I say mean is not the right word, but like, you know, they can tell you off legitimately, and you feel it, versus like sometimes if you sort of like, you know, if you have a bad attitude or whatever, like, you know, my dad will put me in my place, like, and okay, coaches can do that, but like it kind of it burns more from your parent. So, and then other coaches, I'd say they're sort of tactical elements. So it's like coaches in the corner, like, so they're better at sort of like game management, tactical things, those kind of things. And for that, I think that like requires a very high knowledge of the sport and the game. And then, yeah, so there's that. And then there's the coach, the day-to-day coach, like in your session and stuff. And they see you at like your best and your worst. So they sort of have, I don't know, they have a better perspective on things. So like I always find they were like good to talk to because they've seen you play over many months, many hours, whatever. So they know they're sort of very level-headed and grounded, whereas sometimes in the training, like you can feel so like extreme, like one day you feel really great and the next you don't, but in reality you're just sort of, you know, nothing really drastic has happened. It's not a hard question, sorry, I don't think I've explained it very well.
No, I think you have done really well. I suppose just as a follow-up to that, was it a conscious decision by yourself to seek that differing amount of support? I can see Alan's getting excited and saying the support word.
No, it was just simply because of the situation that I was in, like the area that I was playing table tennis, and I was quite lucky that there was two very strong former players and now coaches, and so I worked with them separately, and then I met like another coach who wanted to coach me at tournaments. So it sort of happened by itself, I'd say, but I just think it's that sort of each sort of segment of the pie like comes together. And but it's also like if you're a coach and you're working with other coaches, like they weren't necessarily talking to each other all the time, but it was like an acceptance of knowing that like each coach brings something slightly different, and whilst they may not agree all the time, it's up to like the individual player to like know actually like, oh, that was a good tip, I might combine it with what the other one said, and oh, like, you know, you fit it together. I think it's much better to have like a range of opinions versus like one coach and you're just following everything they say, and because then you're losing out on other ideas. But equally, if you have too many coaches, then things are sort of confusing and you don't really know. So I think it's about having a balance.
Sounds like you found it, definitely, so that's good. Should we move on to a slightly different question?
So yeah, you go, Max. Yeah.
So if I maybe ask one more performance question, then we can go on to well-being, because I'm just conscious of time. So obviously competing in these massive arenas, for instance, like the Commonwealths and things like that, and the amount of training you put into that comes with it a set of expectations maybe when you're there in terms of how you want to perform, and with that it comes maybe a set of emotions as well, things maybe like performance anxiety and things like that. I'm just wondering, how do you and your coaching team go about managing those expectations and some of that sort of emotion that leads into these big games, these big competitions?
Yeah, I think it's quite hard because I would be always nervous, but then you learn to play whilst being nervous. So at the end of the day, it's like if someone asks, oh, are you feeling nervous? I'm like, this is a stupid question, because like if you weren't nervous then you wouldn't care. So I always see like being nervous is sort of like I'm getting prepared for the tournament. But I was sort of, as I got more experience, then I would get less nerves. I used to be nervous like maybe a few weeks before, and then it soon started to be like a few days before, a few sessions before. So I'll always be nervous. So the coach sort of recognized that that I'm on edge. Sort of, then you just get used to that. You just play despite that. Sorry, can you remind me of the question?
It was a bit of a double barrel there, so apologies. It was how you and your coaching team manage those expectations and any sort of the emotions around.
So it's quite hard because obviously the player, for me, a good outcome is always winning, a bad outcome is losing. That's like in your head. That's not technically true, right? So my coach would always be like, yes, but you played well, or what did you learn from that? What were you able to take out from that match? You actually, you know, did some of the things we've been working on in training in the match, like despite the fact you lost. And so that would be like thinking about the positives, like having a growth mindset, you know, from the result. And then like a bad performance for me would genuinely be I would say I never really had any bad losses because I was never like, I didn't really bottle anything, like I didn't really implode. But to me, like I'd say like a bad result would be I scraped through a match and I had a bad attitude, like that kind of thing would be, I take that as a bad result.
Any follow-up, Adam?
No, I was just going to say, so if, you know, if that's happened, if you've scraped through, or you're not happy with the performance, whether you've won or lost or whatever, but what role or what have coaches done before to kind of help you through that difficult time, or where, you know, we all experience a lack of form sometimes, and then confidence might dip, or, you know, around that. But has there been anything that coaches have done at that point that you've really appreciated?
Yeah, I think it's probably like we both like know that I'm not playing as good as they know that I'm not playing as good as I normally do, but they don't let on that. So you wouldn't tell your player you're not playing as good as you normally do. That makes me feel worse. So they actually sort of try to motivate you more, and then come up with strategies. Like they can see how you're playing, like, okay, your forehand is not really working, like let's come up with a plan to win despite that. So it's like finding a way together, like you're a team, versus like being like, oh, what are you doing? Like, you know, like you normally get those forehands on the table. That makes it worse, versus, okay, accepting, you know, today Charlotte's forehand is really bad. I have no idea what's happening. Not saying that, but actually thinking, oh, how are we going to get through this? And then after the match, like having a discussion and be like, right, okay, for the next match, you need to do these exercises because your forehand wasn't as sharp as it could have been. Something like that.
Again, in your experience of being in high performance sport contexts, do you feel like that relationship with your coaches, you know, where it is a little bit more cooperative, is the norm, or do you feel like that's the exception, like with your observations of other athletes and other coaches?
Well, I think that's my experience. It's hard to know for other people. I think often it kind of ends badly when like the player and the coach are fighting, like because the sport relies on, or important crucial points in the match rely on sort of trust, even if like, you know, you're not actually playing that well, but it's just trusting each other that like you're doing it, and that can sort of psychologically make you feel better than you are. But as soon as you start, or the coach or the player starts to resent is the wrong word, but they're not only fighting the opponent, but they're fighting that with their coach, then this is like not very good. Versus you're on the same side and the coach is on your side. They're not against you. They're not giving you bad advice on purpose, like obviously not. But if sometimes certain players might sort of battle with their coach unnecessarily, or coaches tend to like battle with their players unnecessarily, and that kind of can make the match more. They might still win, but it makes it much more harder to, because you're fighting against two people. three people: yourself, your coach, and the opponent.
Maybe makes it a bit easier for you. You might be rooting in the background thinking, yeah, have a little scrap. And then you can pick up the pieces afterwards. Should we move on to the final batch, Adam?
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah, we'll just move on from the performance then to well-being a little bit there, Charlotte. So we know well-being is really important and increasingly becoming recognised as something that's important within sport. So what's been your experience of sporting organisations and coaches' approaches to kind of well-being and mental health, you think, within sport?
I think it's quite hard because mental health affects everyone, but I think with athletes, they might experience the same sort of mental health issues. Say they can sort of manifest themselves in different ways because they're not the average person. They're not living an average life, so to speak. So because they're dealing with like high levels of stress, then it's not easy, but they're able to hide things more than I would say they potentially can. Some athletes can hide things better because they're dealing with so much stress, competitions or whatever, that it might not be obvious, that it might just sort of be bundled up with, oh, they're just that's competition stress, versus actually there's something else going on. I would also say that it's different because athletes can, from my experience, they can sort of have a massive outpouring of emotion and then quickly compartmentalize it and move on because you've got competition, and you sort of just do that constantly. But I don't know if that is sustainable or not, but that is generally because you're dealing with such massive highs and lows all the time. Like it's people sort of it's quite hard to explain, but the higher you go in sport, like the stakes are higher, so the emotions are more, because your life depends on these results. Essentially, like who you are is dependent on these results. So because it gets more and more important, then the highs and lows are much bigger, and so you can suddenly experience like a lot of great emotion and success from winning to then a lot, like a massive dip. It's constantly like that, constantly fluctuating. So it's not like a constant level, which I might say like people who aren't in sport, perhaps it's just sort of different experience.
Yeah, definitely that up and down is definitely different to what would be in a normal day-to-day life. Well, certainly from a vocational professional standpoint, you wouldn't be expecting your job to be causing you such emotional disturbance all the time. One thing you said in there is that there's things that you can hide when you're in sport, and that stress is such a normal part of the day-to-day job. Maybe I think we're just getting told that maybe it's time for questions. Maybe I'll just say this one last question and then wrap up. What is it from your perspective that kind of differentiates that sort of competition training stress from other forms of stress that coaches should be aware of or look out for?
I think it's maybe I said that the only sign would be like crying. People who cry because they're crying a lot. It's like not normal in terms of, we all cry, but like a lot of crying might be a sign that like, okay, you can be upset about something, but like for so long, or so it's like the length of time. So like how normally athletes like bounce back very quickly. Well, good athletes bounce back very quickly from a defeat. Like they can feel like really annoyed and stressed and whatever, and then they forget about it, and then they're on to the next task, training again, whatever, because they want to win. But I think it's maybe sort of like prolonged low mood in training, like a prolonged low mood, because it's understandable if you've had a bad loss to be in a bad mood, but if that is like prolonged, or like they're more visibly upset more often, then I would suggest that would to me indicate that there's perhaps like some other things associated than just your normal, I say your normal, but just your typical sort of, you know, emotional disturbance.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I found that super interesting to be part of and hear your thoughts. And I'm sure, or I hope everybody else did. Maybe we can get some questions. So we've got some question. We've got one question in the chat here, which is from Stuart Mitchell. Sorry, he says, fantastic discussions, impressed by your maturity and reflective ability. Where does your drive come from, and how do you keep a balance between performance, motivation, and well-being?
Where does my drive come from? I feel like we asked these questions, but how do you keep a balance between performance, motivation, and well-being? I think it's probably hard because often you associate performance with well-being. Like if you as an athlete like connect like your success and then determine your well-being on that, is not necessarily the best thing to do, because if that makes sense, like you shouldn't validate your own worth based on how your sport is going. The second that those become so like interwoven, then you're walking on a tightrope, really, because if it's going well, then you feel great, but if sport's not working out, then you feel bad as a person, which isn't clearly not a reflection on who you are. So in terms of keeping that balance, I just have to keep telling myself that. Like there's no actual like mechanism. It's just acknowledging that and then being like, actually, no, it's nothing to do with that. It's something else. So it's hard. I think it's just like a lot of these things I just found there's just like experience over time. You learn things rather than there's no actual sort of like mechanism. It's just learning something and being aware of it, essentially.
Like a general principle, but then figuring out, fine-tuning what works for you.
Yeah.
Any more questions from the floor?
There's just one on the chat there from Lucy Boyce. So have you worked at all with a sports psychologist in your career so far? And then how important do you think the psychological side of table tennis is?
I didn't work with a psychologist throughout my career as I was playing. I didn't. I often found it quite hard because I overthink a lot. Like I'm a very good thinker. So I often found that like the more I sort of like ruminated on things, I sort of spiral. So I try to like, maybe this is itself a psychological, I don't know, tactic is the wrong thing, psychological thing, to not think as much. Like I really like the slogan, like the Nike slogan, which is like, just do it. So sometimes for me was like not thinking about issues made it better. Otherwise I was so distracted being like, oh, think about all these things. Like actually no, like just play. I've done the training, I've done all these things, just play. How important do I think the psychology? I probably have to, when I was younger, I didn't think it was that important, but I think that's because when you're a child, you're just sort of hitting the ball, like you're not really thinking as much. But when I became a senior, I probably realized I was more important because I was abroad, like on my own, like I was an adult for the first time kind of thing. And so it was quite like lonely. And also, as I said before, like when the stakes get higher, then it becomes more about the psychological side of it, because it's like if you're not winning your matches, then you're not going to get a contract with the club. So those kind of things, the questions become much bigger life questions the higher you go up and the older you get. Because when you're a child, you're still, you're a child and you're at home and you're looked after. But But when the sport becomes your career and your life, then there's all these other things you have to manage alongside it, which is dependent on your results. Like if you're not performing at the top of your game, then you won't have a career anymore. So the psychological side became harder, I think, later in my career when I was at my best.
Excellent, thank you. I'm just conscious of time. I think we've probably got less than a minute left, so we'll probably call it quits there. I just want to say a massive thank you, Charlotte, for coming on and opening up about motivation, performance, and well-being. Was really interesting from my perspective. And yeah, good luck with your future endeavours from a table tennis perspective. Hopefully, we're seeing you at commies and the Olympics as well, potentially.
Yeah, we'll see. But yeah.
Not
Brilliant,
placing
no,
any expectations.
Yeah, thanks so much for that, Charlotte. Great job.
Bye.
Thank you very much. Okay, should we pass over to who's handling the in-between? Or is it straight into the
So we've got the keynote, guys, in 6 minutes. So we can take a little comfort break and we'll be set up to start right on time because I see that Evan's here as well. And Adam will be chairing the session where it'll be a fireside chat afternoon keynote. So yeah, if you want to take a quick break and be back in time for the keynote, that would be great.